By any particular measure, life is hard. Right? Life is hard. It's one of those inexorable things. Life is hard. It's a challenge. It's work. You got to engage in it. You got to work at it. You got to be willing to take bumps and bruises along the way to get from one place to the other. Life is hard. And none of us gets out of it without challenges. And even when it feels like it's going well, we all know that the possibility of something going off the rails is just a moment away, just a phone call away, just a posting away, just something happening in the world for which we have no control over away. It is hard. It's hard. We all know that. There's no deep mystery to saying that. There's no deep mystery to thinking that. And because we know that, we also know that all of us, in a variety of ways, do everything we can to keep it from being hard. Right? Consciously and subconsciously, we're all working at how do we get the world to work for us? How do we get it to spin our way? How can we take that which is a challenge and turn it into a blessing? How do we get the world to work for us? And most of us will do just about anything to get the world to spin our way, to ease what we think is its burdens, and to protect our lives and the lives of all of those who we love and cherish and hold dear to us. If we could get the world to be a little bit safer, we'll do just about anything. All of us. All of us. We've all engaged in that. We've all seen it in our lives. We all know that feeling. Right? And if we look at the world and where we find ourselves at this moment in time, we find some real challenges in trying to get it to spin our way. There are things in our world right now that just are beyond our control, and so we act out in all sorts of ways. We all respond to the stress of this sort of time, if you may, all of this, and we act out in ways, and we try to control the things that we can control. And so when we look at the world around us, one of the great pressing questions on us is, to put it gently, a question of diversity. And how do we live and work and deal with diversity? And by any measure, by any sort of casual observation, the world, the creation, is filled up with diversity, right? From the nature around us to the expanse of the cosmos to the very things about human beings. Even when we are the same, we are different. And when you look at all of that, it's hard to escape the notion that God must have a thing for diversity, that diversity and difference and variety is somehow embedded in God. It's almost as if we missed that maybe one of the seminal conversations about God should begin with diversity and difference, because it is all around us. And yet we know from the plants in my yard to the way I want the grass to grow, to my dog, to my relationships, we work to minimize diversity. We work hard to minimize diversity. I don't want crabgrass with my Kentucky bluegrass. I don't want weeds and dandelions in my flowers, right? We think that the way to make this world safe is to make it controllable and like me. And when we hear St. Paul talking today, right, it's almost as if St. Paul is reflecting on this very struggle. He has a code word for this struggle, a very churchy sort of code word. He calls it sin. We are tempted into sin. We are tempted into doing things and being things that God never imagined us being. And we call it sin. And Jesus brings up the story, right? Jesus brings up the story, and he's reflecting that there would appear to be nothing about us that God could ever do to make us happy. That he reflects on the Baptist comes, and we didn't like that. Jesus comes, and we certainly don't like that. Right, and there's this conflict that, John, he warns us, right? John told us who we are, and we didn't like that story. So we cut his head off. And then Jesus comes, and what do we see in Jesus? Is drawing us into this diverse, messy, chaotic world. Right? Jesus came and he eats and he drinks with sinners. And the funny thing about that is, as we all know, everybody Jesus eats and drinks with is a sinner, right? We all know that, but we categorize that and we struggle with it, right? We struggle with it because we're still back to that thing about how do we make the world safe for me? How do we make the world safe for the people that I love? How do we do that? How do we do that? And it's as if Jesus bypasses that question completely, because we can't make our world safe. Right? We can't make our world safe because its chaotic beauty is part of what it is. Right? We can't make our world safe, but he invites us. There's this strange then little thing he says. He says, "Come to me, all who are laboring and with heavy burdens, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke, for my burden is light." And I think we wrestle with this because it sounds like Jesus is promising, well, he'll make our lives easier, right? So if I just believe in Jesus, if I just would believe in Jesus, my life is going to go better and my life is going to be easy. And that lasts for about a day and a half until we go back into the world. I thought you were going to make my life easy. And that doesn't seem to be what he's talking about, that he's asking us to think about who he is. And all of the things that we read in stuff like the Sermon on the Mount, and all of the feeding, and all of the eating with sinners, and all of the healings, he's trying to give us a hint as to what God thinks about life and the world. And it's as if he's saying, take that up. Take it up. Because in those places, in those things, by embracing that sense of life, that sense of the world, that sense of ourselves, we start to become human. We start to become the people that God imagined us to be. He talks about this thing, this yoke, taking this yoke, and that, and there's a mix to that, right? Is this is burden, but if you think about it, at least in the ancient biblical text, that notion that when he said that, perhaps people would have thought about a yoke of oxen, right? 2 oxen put together for the purpose of pulling a plow. That if we're to take our yoke, his yoke, onto us, that what he's saying to us is, join yourself to me. Join yourself to me. And let's go through this world together, because you keep trying to go through the world alone. You keep trying to pull the proverbial plow of this life on your own. And frankly, that's why you're tired. Frankly, that's why you're afraid. Frankly, that's why you do this stuff in church code that we call sin. Right? That's why we're afraid of diversity, why we're afraid of losing control, why we're afraid that our neighbor might get something we don't have, why we're afraid someday we're going to die. Right? That because we've been carrying this story all on our own. All on our own. And so Jesus says to us, again and again and again and again, tie yourself to my life. Tie yourself to my vision. Tie yourself to who I am. And even in those moments when it looks terrifying, it's in those places that you'll find your life. It is in those places that you'll figure out what it means to be a human being. It is this place where you will see your true self. And through the long story of humanity, we continue to fail to do that. Each one of us continues to stumble at that point. We continue to be tempted into thinking that there is an easier way, a better way, a more lucrative way. We keep doing that. And he keeps coming back to us again and again and again. And he says, and yet my burden is easy. My yoke, my way of being human is a lot easier and a lot lighter and a lot more life-giving than yours. Why don't you try it? Why don't you try it? As we wind our way through this weekend, through the week that's ahead of us, what if we tried for a few moments that story that Jesus shows to us, and all of the things that he did, and all of the eating and the drinking and the feeding and the healing and the teaching? What if there was really something in that story that showed us what our week might look like, what showed us what was worth living for, that showed us how to engage in this world? My burden is easy. My yoke is light. Amen.